Please check what you are going to training objectives on this task. Competitors can prepare weld joints of 10mm test plate and tack welds the plate with SMAW process. Task: weld a 10mm test plate with SMAW. Objective: to be able to weld given material with root, fill, and cap passes. Goals: strengthen weld joint preparation and welding skills. Make sound welds without any defects such as undercut, porosity, and slag inclusion. Materials: base material 10T by 250 mm by 250 mm with a 30-degree bevel angle, 2 each. Welding process for root and cap pass, SMAW. Welding rod, KF500LF 3.2 mm. Main focus of the task. When preparing the weld joints, check if both the root face and bevel angle are uniform. File the root face up to 1 to 2 mm with line precisely after grinding the root face. Use a magnetic base to maintain the alignment by holding the base materials horizontally. Keep a 3.2 mm root gap at the start point and a 4 mm root gap at the end respectively. Fit a 4 mm round bar to keep the root gap and tack welding the 2 points with small tacks without any damage on the root face. Dry the welding electrode properly and maintain a short arc length to prevent porosity. To prevent slag inclusions, clean between each pass and grind all start-stop points. Undercut occurs when welding current is too high or the arc length becomes too long. 80 to 90 amps is adequate current for root pass. 110 to 120 amps is adequate for cap and fill pass. To prevent overlap, maintain an adequate weaving width and pitch and uniform travel speed. The weave width should be controlled by checking the welding puddle formation and travel in uniform speed, maintaining 3 to 4 mm arc length. Please check the preparations and tools for this training. Precautions. If there is no root face, joint root will melt easily and cause burn-through at the joint root of the plate. Make the root face of 1.2 to 2.5 mm. After tack welding, make a pre-stain of plates to the opposite direction from the welding surface about 2 to 4 degrees to prevent distortion after welding. Strike the yard for root pass welding on a spare material. By making U-profile groove, the molten puddle can flow smoothly without overflow to the other area. When welding starts, strike the arc in front of welds, then bring it back to welds when an arc has stabilized to prevent welding defects. Make 2 to 3 spot welds 5 to 10 mm from the end part of the plate. Fast weaving could cause undercut at both ends since fill pass welding needs higher welding current than root pass. If possible, weave little by little and make sure the tip of the wire to pause at both ends. For cap pass weaving, pause little longer at both ends than the center to prevent welding defects. When welding starts of cap pass, grind off slightly welds with a baby grinder prior to welding, considering the cap reinforcement to be increased after welding. Please check the tasks to perform.
수행 내용입니다.
Preparation of base material weld joints. It is a single V-groove joint. Make the bevel on each plate a 30 degree. Maintain root face about 1.2 to 2.5 millimeters after weld joint preparation. When preparing, draw a marking line at the location of 1.2 to 2.5 millimeters from the edge of joint root with vernier calipers. Use a grinder and a file to dress the metal precisely up to the drawn line.
줄을 이용해 그어놓은 선까지 정밀하게 가공해 주는 것이 좋습니다.
The reason for root face preparation. If there is no root face, the joint root will melt easily, causing burn-through on the base material. Grind the root face about 1.2 to 2.5 millimeters so that it is not too sharp. Check whether the root faces of the two corresponding base metal are even and have no gap between the two when they are brought face to face. Once checking has done, remove the burr from each edge with a file. A grinder may be used to remove shop primer coating on the weld joint. Uniform root face should be maintained over the whole weld joint so that the weld parameters remain constant. If light filters through the gap between the two plates when they put together, that means the root faces are irregular, so the rework should be done. Tack welding for base material. Adjust the root gap and the alignment of the plates. Use a magnetic base to maintain the alignment by holding the base materials horizontally. Check misalignment of plates with a steel ruler. After checking the misalignment, clear the space between the base materials. Keep a 3.2 mm root gap at the starting point of the base material. Insert the 3.2 mm filler metal in the middle to keep the root gap. Welding current at 90 to 105 ampere. Tack welding. Welding process SMAW. Strike an arc first on the spare testing plate. Bring the arc to the base material and weld tacks. To prevent overflow of the molten puddle, weave to right and left side carefully. Make 2 to 3 spot welds to prevent overflow of the molten puddle. Check the quality of tack welds. Remove the slag and check if the tack weld present back bead appears properly. Tack welding at the endpoint. After welding, shrinkage may occur. To prevent the shrinkage, keep a 4 mm root gap at the endpoint. If the root gap is too tight, widen it with a chipping hammer and confirm the alignment. If there is misalignment, use a chipping hammer to adjust it by bending it up and downwards. Insert a 4 mm round bar to keep the root gap. Strike the arc on the spare plate, then tack weld the round bar at the base material. If there is too deep penetration, it becomes hard to remove tacks of the round bar prior to welding, so make small tacks to the point where both plates are fixed. When tack welding is completed, check the quality of tack welds. Check the root gap at the start and the end of the base material and the alignment of the base material. If there are incorrect parts, dismantle and do rework. Main welding preparation and pre-strain. Prior to main welding, make a U-profile on a tack weld at starting point by grinding with a grinder fitted with 2T disc. The reason for shaping with a grinder: for smooth transition between the weldment of tack welding and main welding. Check the condition of U-profile and make a pre-stain of plates to the opposite direction from the welding surface about 2 to 4 degrees to prevent distortion after welding. The amount of pre-strain shall be considered since the number of welding passes increased, more welding shrinkage will occur. Consider the number of welding passes, set the proper pre-strain. Base material welding, root pass. A welder will weld in vertical position. Fit the base material into the jig tight enough. Base material shall be kept 90 degrees. The highest part of the plate shall be as high as the chest of the welder when a welder is sitting on the chair. The welding current, 85 to 95 amps. Use dried electrode, KF500LF 3.2 mm, and insert it to the welding holder. To prevent any movement of the holder, wrap the welding cable on the right arm one time. After striking an arc, put the tip of electrode on V-groove and weave as electrode fused. V-groove joint has deep and narrow groove. It's easy to generate slag inclusions and incomplete penetration. Make a small hole in front of weld with the size preventing burn through and progress welding. It's called a keyhole. It should be 1 to 2 millimeters bigger than the root gap. Continue welding while keeping this keyhole. 80 to 100 millimeter length of welds could be made with one electrode. Whenever finish the electrode, move the slag and grind off the welds for next connection. Grind off stops, starts, bead connection with a grinder fitted with 2T disc. Grind beads in a half-moon profile to avoid overflow of the molten puddle. After grinding, clean up the contaminant with a cup brush again. Start welding with a new electrode and make bead connection. When a stop-start bead connection welding, strike an arc on the bead and bring it to inside of groove when the arc is stabilized. This is because to prevent welding defects during the bead connection. Keep the short arc length. The work angle should be kept at 90 degrees and the travel angle at 5 to 15 degrees. Tilt the torch a little downwards. Remove the slag on the bead. If slag doesn't get off easily, it means something went wrong. Make a U-profile groove on a tack weld with a grinder fitted with 2T grinding disc. Remove the tacked 4 mm round bar at the end point with a grinder. Remove excessive tacks with a chipping hammer. Grind off the excessive tacks completely. Clean up with a cup brush after grinding. After striking an arc with tapping technique on beads, bring the molten puddle to inside of the groove when the arc is stabilized. When the keyhole gets bigger while the root pass welding, weave a little bit faster. When the keyhole gets smaller, insert the electrode deep inside of the V-groove and weave slowly by pausing at both ends. Make 2 to 3 times of spot welding at 5 to 10 millimeters prior to the end point. After removing slag completely, grind off excessive reinforcement and uneven beads. After grinding, clean up with a cup brush. Base material welding. Fill pass. Split the layer and weld with 2 passes for SMAW fill pass. Deposit half of groove with first fill pass. The welding will have 2 to 3 stops while fill pass welding because the length of electrode is short. Remove slag whenever each pass welding is completed to prevent welding defects. When weaving speed gets faster, undercut may occur on both groove surface since the current for fill pass is higher than root pass. If possible, weave little by little and make sure the tip of the wire to pause briefly at the both ends. Welding current for fill pass 115 ampere. Remove the slag after completion of the first fill pass. Grind off excessive reinforcement and uneven beads. Remove contaminant with a cup brush and check the welding conditions. Base material. Second fill pass. Deposit weld lower than 0.5 millimeters of the base material at second fill pass. The edge part of V-groove can be melted because of the high current. Weave slowly and pause briefly at the end of each sideways movement. After finishing the first electrode, eliminate the slag and insert the additional electrode at the welding joint. The way of the weaving is the same as first fill pass. Be careful because staying at both ends of the V-groove for too long may cause undercuts or improper penetration. After finishing the electrode, take off the electrode and eliminate the slag. When slag removed easily when hit with a chipping hammer, it means welding done correctly. Place the new electrode at the welding joint and keep welding up. 2 to 3 times of spot welding at 5 to 10 millimeters prior to the end point and keep the arc length short. Remove slag after the second fill pass and grind off the excessive reinforcement and uneven beads. Base material cap pass. Pay special attention to prevent potential defects for cap pass, which is welding beads to be accessed. Keep short arc length while weaving from one end to the other end of groove. During welding, pause briefly at both ends and travel fast across the center. If the electrode paused too much in the center, it may occur the overlap defect. The reason why staying at the end of each bead is to prevent the incomplete penetration or undercut. When an electrode consumed, remove slag on welding beads. Cap pass is a final pass to completing the welding, so the height of the bead shall be uniform. When welding starts of cap pass, grind weld slightly prior to welding with a baby grinder, considering cap reinforcement to be increased after welding. When welding starts of cap pass, strike an arc 15 to 20 millimeters in front of welds, then bring it back to welds and keep weaving. Keep the short arc length to prevent any welding defects. Make 2 to 3 times of spot welding at 5 to 10 millimeters prior to the end point, and keep the arc length short. Remove the spatters and slag on the weld surface throughout. Sweep carefully not to damage the bead. Clean up any contaminants with a cup brush and check the welding conditions. Visual inspection. Pre-strain works and distortion controlled properly? Is the weld joint free from any welding defects such as undercut or underfill? Is it free from any arc strike? Is the width of beads are regular and uniform? Please check the key points of the task you have done this time. So far, we have learned about the SMAW construction of 10mm test plate. Thank you, everyone.